Have you ever been called too intense? Or maybe too calm? Here's something that might blow your mind. Both of those so-called criticisms might actually be signs of something incredible happening in your brain. Something you've probably never given yourself credit for. Most people walk around completely unaware of their own mental strengths. They focus on their weaknesses, their mistakes, their awkward moments. But today, we're flipping the script. Because there are subtle signs, things you do without even thinking about them, that reveal a level of mental power most people simply don't have. And before you think this is going to be some generic self-help nonsense, let me be clear. I'm not talking about being special or better than others. I'm talking about specific observable patterns in how your brain operates that put you ahead of the curve in ways you've never recognized. So let's dive into the first sign, and I promise you by the end of this video you're going to see yourself in a completely different light. Sign number 1. You don't need constant external validation to make decisions. Now, I know what you're thinking. Of course I don't need validation, I'm independent. But hold on, let me paint you a picture. Think about the last time you wanted to make a decision. Maybe it was buying something expensive or choosing a career path or even just deciding where to eat dinner. Did you immediately pull out your phone and text 5 different people asking for their opinion? Did you post a poll on your Instagram story? Did you spend hours reading reviews and watching comparison videos? If you didn't, you're already in a minority. Most people are validation junkies. They need approval from their friends, their family, strangers on the internet, even people they don't particularly like or respect. It's like they're collecting permission slips before they allow themselves to move forward. But here's what's fascinating. If you can make decisions without that constant feedback loop, your brain has developed something called internal locus of control. That's psychology speak for you trust your own judgment more than external opinions. This doesn't mean you never ask for advice. Smart people absolutely seek counsel. But there's a massive difference between gathering information and needing emotional approval. You're gathering data points. They're seeking reassurance, and here's where it gets even more interesting. Research shows that people with strong internal locus of control are significantly better at handling stress, achieve higher levels of success, and report greater life satisfaction. Why? Because they're not at the mercy of other people's constantly changing opinions. Think about it. Your friend's advice changes based on their mood that day. Your mom's perspective is filtered through her own fears and experiences. Random internet strangers are projecting their own insecurities onto you. But your brain has been collecting data about you for your entire life. It knows what you value, what you're capable of, what you actually want versus what you think you should want. When you trust that internal compass, you're tapping into a sophisticated processing system that external validation simply cannot match. Now here's the kicker. Most people who have this trait don't even realize it's a strength. They sometimes feel guilty about it. They wonder if they're being too stubborn or too closed off. But that's just the noise of a world that profits from your insecurity. So if you find yourself making decisions confidently, without needing a committee meeting first, give yourself some credit. That's mental power. Sign number 2, you change your mind when you encounter better information. This one's going to surprise you because it sounds like the opposite of mental strength. We're taught that changing your mind is weakness, flip-flopping, being wishy-washy, lacking conviction, but here's the truth that most people never grasp. The ability to update your beliefs based on new evidence is one of the most sophisticated cognitive abilities humans possess. Let me tell you why this matters. Your brain is constantly trying to create a coherent model of reality. It's building a story about how the world works, and that story helps you navigate life. But here's the problem. The world is complicated. and your initial story is always incomplete. Most people, when confronted with information that contradicts their worldview, do something predictable. They reject it. They get defensive. They double down on their original position. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, and it's one of the most limiting forces in human thinking. But if you're the type of person who can genuinely say, I didn't know that. I need to rethink my position, your brain is doing something remarkable. It's prioritizing accuracy over ego protection. Think about political debates or arguments about nutrition or discussions about parenting. Most people are just defending their identity, not seeking truth. They've tied their beliefs so tightly to their sense of self that changing their mind feels like losing a piece of themselves. But you? If you have this trait, you've separated your ego from your ideas. You understand that being wrong is just the process of becoming less wrong. And that's intellectual maturity that most people never achieve. Here's a practical example. Maybe you used to believe that working longer hours automatically meant more productivity. Then you read some research about diminishing returns and the importance of rest. And instead of dismissing it because it challenged your work ethic, you actually tested it in your own life. You adjusted your schedule, you updated your model. That's not weakness, that's scientific thinking, that's mental power. And here's what's really interesting. People with this cognitive flexibility tend to be more successful long-term. Why? Because they're constantly optimizing. They're not locked into outdated strategies, they're adaptive. Evolution didn't favor the strongest or the smartest. It favored the most adaptable. And your ability to change your mind? That's adaptation in real time. Sign number 3, you can be alone without feeling lonely. Okay, this one hits different because we live in an age of constant connectivity. Everyone's always available, always online, always just a text away. And yet so many people are terrified of being alone with their own thoughts. If you can spend hours by yourself genuinely enjoying your own company, not as a coping mechanism but as a preference sometimes, you have something most people are desperately lacking: a strong internal world. Let me explain what I mean. Most people's sense of self is externally constructed. They know who they are based on how others perceive them, based on their relationships, based on their social roles. Take away the external mirrors, and they don't know what they're looking at. But if you can be alone and actually enjoy it, if you can spend a Saturday by yourself and not feel like you're missing out or being left behind, your sense of identity is internally generated. You're not dependent on others to tell you who you are. This is huge, and I mean huge. Because here's what happens when your self-concept is externally dependent. You become manipulable. You need people's approval, so you shape yourself to get it. You need validation, so you perform for it. You need attention, so you sacrifice authenticity for it. But when you're comfortable alone, when you actually like the person you are when nobody's watching, you're operating from a position of strength. You're not negotiating your identity. You're not people-pleasing. You're not performing. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean you're antisocial or that you don't value relationships. Healthy people absolutely need connection. But there's a difference between enjoying socializing and needing it to feel okay about yourself. Think about it this way. If your phone died for a weekend, would you panic? Would you feel disconnected from yourself? Or would you kind of enjoy the break? If it's the latter, you've developed what psychologists call self-sufficiency, and it's one of the strongest predictors of mental health and life satisfaction. People with strong internal worlds are also more creative, more reflective, and more emotionally regulated. Why? Because they've spent time developing their inner landscape. They've had conversations with themselves, they've processed their experiences, they've built a rich mental life that doesn't require constant external stimulation. And here's the beautiful irony. People who are comfortable being alone often have the deepest, most meaningful relationships. Because they're not using other people to fill a void. They're connecting from a place of wholeness, not desperation. So if you can spend a Friday night at home, working on a project or reading a book or just thinking, and you don't feel like you're missing out, recognize that for what it is. Mental power. Sign number 4. You detect patterns before other people do. Have you ever had that experience where you just knew something was off before anyone else noticed? Maybe you sensed tension in a relationship before it exploded. Maybe you predicted a trend before it became mainstream. Maybe you saw a problem coming at work before it became a crisis. If this sounds familiar, you have what's called high pattern recognition, and it's one of the most underrated forms of intelligence. Here's how it works. Your brain is constantly processing massive amounts of information, most of it subconsciously. It's looking for patterns, for connections, for deviations from the norm. And when you have strong pattern recognition, your brain is exceptionally good at connecting dots that others don't even see yet. This isn't about being psychic, it's about having a brain that's highly attuned to subtle cues. You notice when someone's behavior changes slightly. You pick up on inconsistencies in stories. You see how different pieces of information relate to each other even when they seem unrelated on the surface. Let me give you a concrete example. Maybe you're in a meeting and everyone's excited about a new project, but something feels off to you. The timeline's too aggressive. The budget doesn't account for certain realities. The stakeholders haven't been properly consulted. You can't quite articulate it yet, but your gut is screaming that this is going to be a problem. 3 months later, the project's falling apart for exactly the reasons you sensed but couldn't fully explain. That's pattern recognition. Your brain was processing variables and probabilities faster than your conscious mind could articulate them. People with high pattern recognition often get dismissed as overthinkers or paranoid or too negative. But here's the reality. They're usually right. They're just ahead of the curve. This trait is especially valuable in complex, uncertain environments. Business leaders with strong pattern recognition spot opportunities and threats earlier. They make better strategic decisions because they're working with more data points than others see. And here's what's fascinating. This ability can be trained, but some people naturally have a more sensitive pattern detection system. If you're one of them, you've probably spent your life feeling like you're seeing things others miss. And you're right. You are. The challenge is learning to trust it without letting it make you anxious. Because yes, you'll see problems coming. But you'll also see opportunities others miss. You'll understand people at a deeper level. You'll navigate complexity better. That's not overthinking. That's sophisticated cognitive processing. That's mental power. Sign number 5. Cheap provocations don't affect you. Someone tries to bait you into an argument. Someone makes a passive-aggressive comment. Someone posts something on social media clearly designed to get a reaction. And you just don't bite. If this describes you, you've developed something incredibly valuable. Emotional regulation at an unconscious level. Most people are reactive. Someone pushes their button and boom, they're angry, defensive, hurt, ready to fight. It's automatic, it's reflexive, they can't help it. But if you can watch someone try to provoke you and feel nothing, or at least not feel compelled to respond, your brain has built sophisticated emotion filtering systems. Here's what's happening neurologically. When someone provokes you, your amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, fires up. It's screaming, threat, react, defend. But your prefrontal cortex, the rational part, can override that response. In most people, that override requires conscious effort. They have to talk themselves down. They have to breathe. They have to count to 10. But if you have strong natural emotional regulation, that override happens automatically. Your brain has learned through experience and possibly through natural disposition that most provocations aren't worth the energy. so it filters them out before they even register as important. This is massive for several reasons. First, it means you're conserving mental energy. Every emotional reaction costs you something. When you don't react to trivial provocations, you're saving that energy for things that actually matter. Second, it means you're harder to manipulate. Think about it. Manipulation works through emotional triggers. Make someone angry and they'll act impulsively. Make someone defensive and they'll reveal information they shouldn't. Make someone insecure and they'll seek validation. But if those triggers don't work on you, manipulators have no leverage. You're psychologically expensive to manipulate. Most people will just move on to easier targets. Third, it gives you a strategic advantage in conflicts. While others are reacting emotionally, you're thinking clearly. You see the game being played. You understand the motivations. You can respond strategically instead of reactively. Now, here's an important distinction. This isn't about suppressing emotions. Suppression is unhealthy. This is about appropriate emotional response. You feel emotions, but you're not controlled by them. You experience them, process them, and then decide how to act. Think about the last time someone tried to make you angry or jealous or insecure. Did it work? Did you ruminate on it for days? Or did you just shrug it off and move on? If it's the latter, you have a level of emotional maturity and psychological resilience that most people spend years trying to develop. And you might be doing it without even trying. That's mental power. Sign number 6, you question your own beliefs. This might be the most counterintuitive sign on this list, because we're taught that confidence means being certain, being decisive, being unwavering in your convictions. But here's what real mental sophistication looks like. You regularly examine your own beliefs, not because you're insecure, but because you're intellectually honest. Most people don't do this. They inherit beliefs from their family, their culture, their early experiences, and they just run with them forever. They never actually interrogate whether those beliefs are true or useful or even theirs. But if you find yourself thinking thoughts like, wait, why do I believe this? What evidence am I basing this on? What if I'm wrong? You're engaging in something called metacognition. That's thinking about your thinking, and it's a sign of advanced cognitive development. Let me give you an example. Maybe you've always believed that success requires sacrifice and suffering. That's a common cultural narrative. But then you start questioning it. Where did that belief come from? Is it actually true, or is it just a story you've been telling yourself? And here's what happens when you question your beliefs. Sometimes you confirm them, which makes them stronger. And sometimes you realize they were never yours to begin with, which frees you. This ability to self-examine is what separates people who grow throughout their lives from people who calcify. It's the difference between becoming wiser with age versus just becoming more rigid. And here's the really interesting part. People who regularly question their own beliefs are actually more confident, not less, because their beliefs have been tested. They know why they believe what they believe. It's not just inherited dogma. It's examined conviction. This trait also makes you a better thinker in general. You're less susceptible to propaganda. You're less likely to fall for scams or cons. You're more resistant to cult-like thinking. Why? Because you're already in the habit of questioning things, including yourself. Now, there's a balance here. You can take this too far and become paralyzed by self-doubt. But if you're questioning yourself in a productive way, in a curious way rather than a critical way, you're engaging in one of the highest forms of human cognition. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." If you're examining your life, your beliefs, your assumptions, you're living philosophically. You're engaging your mind at the deepest level. That's mental power. Sign number 7. You end unproductive conversations without guilt. Here's the final sign, and it's a big one. You're in a conversation that's going nowhere. Maybe it's an argument that's just circular. Maybe it's gossip that feels toxic. Maybe it's someone venting endlessly without wanting solutions. And you just exit. Not rudely, not aggressively. You just politely extract yourself. I need to go. Let's talk about this another time. I don't think this conversation is productive. And here's the key part. You don't feel guilty about it afterward. If you can do this, you've developed something most people struggle with their entire lives. Healthy boundaries. Most people are boundaryless. They let conversations drain them. They participate in interactions that leave them feeling worse. They stay in situations that aren't serving them because they're afraid of being rude or being disliked or seeming difficult. But here's the truth. Your time and your mental energy are finite resources. Every minute you spend in an unproductive conversation is a minute you're not spending on something meaningful. People with strong boundaries understand this intuitively. They're not being selfish. They're being responsible with their resources. They know that in order to show up fully for the things that matter, they need to protect themselves from the things that don't. And here's what's interesting. When you start ending unproductive conversations, something magical happens. People respect you more, not less. They learn that your time is valuable. They learn that if they want your attention, they need to bring something worthwhile to the table. It also filters your relationships. People who respect boundaries will adjust their behavior. People who don't will drift away. And that's not a bad thing. That's your life automatically optimizing for quality over quantity. Now, this doesn't mean you're never there for people. It doesn't mean you don't support friends who are struggling. It means you're discerning about where you invest your energy. There's a difference between being there for someone who's processing something difficult and being someone's emotional dumping ground. There's a difference between a challenging conversation that leads somewhere and an argument that's just two people defending their egos. If you can tell the difference and act accordingly, you have a level of self-respect and emotional intelligence that's genuinely rare. Think about the last time you were in a conversation that felt pointless or draining. Did you stay because you felt you had to? Or did you find a way to exit gracefully? If you chose yourself, if you protected your energy, if you set that boundary, recognize what that represents. It's not coldness, it's not selfishness, it's mental power, bringing it all together. So let's recap these 7 signs. You don't need constant external validation. You change your mind when you encounter better information. You can be alone without feeling lonely. You detect patterns before others do. Cheap provocations don't affect you. You question your own beliefs. And you end unproductive conversations without guilt. If even 3 or 4 of these resonate with you, you have cognitive and emotional strengths that most people simply don't possess. And the beautiful thing is, you've probably been doing these things naturally, without even recognizing them as strengths. We live in a world that's really good at pointing out weaknesses. Social media, advertising, self-help culture, they all profit from making you feel insufficient. But the truth is, you're probably more mentally powerful than you give yourself credit for. These signs aren't about being perfect. They're not about being better than anyone else. They're about recognizing the sophisticated ways your brain has learned to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and human interaction. And here's the real insight. Once you recognize these strengths, you can lean into them more intentionally. You can develop them further. You can use them more strategically. You can stop second-guessing your judgment. You can trust your pattern recognition. You can protect your energy without guilt. You can keep growing and adapting instead of calcifying into rigid positions. That's what mental power really is. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's not about having all the answers. It's about having a mind that's flexible, resilient, self-aware, and continuously evolving. So take a moment and give yourself some credit. You're probably doing better than you think. You're probably stronger than you realize. And now that you know what to look for, you can recognize it in yourself more clearly. Because mental power isn't loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't announce itself. It's quiet, consistent, and often invisible even to the person who possesses it. But it's there. And if you recognized yourself in these signs, it's there in you. Now go use it.